Hey guys, welcome back to the IgniteCast with myself and Dan Greider and Jim Richmond. So glad to see you guys back again, staying cool in the heat of the summer. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, it's been hot.
mostly.
It's been hot in Middle Tennessee. I'm sure it's hot everywhere right now. But man, welcome to our August IgniteCast, and we're going into kind of the fall almost, not getting close to moving into the fall. And I was just thinking as we were getting ready for this, I have been incredibly distracted for the past couple months. So we have been on 2 weeks in Ecuador with the family. I've been on multiple weeks of travel for different things regarding work and camps and trainings and all kind of things. And so just kind of refocusing and starting to get back thinking about August. And we're going to start an accelerate of our first accelerate cycle in a year. We had so much traction a couple years ago, we had to stop and just kind of catch up and get people headed moving in the right direction. And so we're relaunching our accelerate, thinking about all that and thinking, how in the world am I going to transition out of travel and vacation and family season into back into a new kind of a new chapter of the ministry. So I don't know. I was just thinking maybe you guys have some thoughts about how to help me with that. So when you're coming out of a hard season, a busy season, a distracting season, and you're ready to get grounded again, y'all have any thoughts about what do you do? How do you reorient back into the mission field again? I don't know. Just thought you might be able to help me with that, and other people on the call the same thing. So any thoughts about that?
Kevin, I would say first of all, I think sometimes we're so hard driving that we feel like in the summertime when all the schedules kind of get interrupted and things are different, that's a bad thing. But I don't think it is. I think it's good to kind of have some rhythms and take some breaks and that kind of thing. But some of the things that I really see all throughout the network that people are doing a really good job of, and I think I've experienced this some myself as well, is just one of the things that helps get rolling again is to just, in a sense, stay in touch throughout the summer. And, summer's a good time. You may not be having accelerate gatherings and things like that, but you can and should still be staying in touch, sub coaching and that kind of thing, which we're going to continue to talk about today. And so that's one thing. But then I see some of the folks in the network are having all gatherings with
Hmm.
all their past accelerators, the people that they're interested in adding, and just but it's really more of a huge cookout, and a hangout, and then people maybe just share a little bit here and there, and so. Beginning to use that time to kind of start making connections as you head into the next season, I think also is a really wise use of this moment.
That's really good. I hopefully most of us are also consistently doing our half days of prayer, and that's just kind of what I was thinking. Is I'll utilize that, going into August half day of prayer to really refocus and not just recharge, but yeah, to just kind of do an assessment of where we are, where we want to go this next season, this next chapter. Also really great. I love that you said that because, yeah, driven people like most are in our network, we're primarily an apostolic network, view parties and cookouts and things like that as like second, third tier, right? Like, can we get past this so we can move on to the good stuff? But really, that's such an important part of solidifying your network and your relationships and viewing yourself as a family. So that's so good. I'm going to think about that. I'm going to think about what kind of all gathering I can have going into August. So thank you a ton for that. So
I had two different network leaders just this last week apologize. They said, "Well, I know we're not supposed to do this, but we're having a barbecue, getting all of our accelerators together." And of course, they're type A, very apostolic, and they're apologizing for it. I said, "Don't you really? That's actually part of the plan. That when you have all gatherings, the July barbecue is kind of it's different from all the rest of them, but you should have a July barbecue." And they said, "Oh, I'm supposed to." Well, that's cool. I kind of felt guilty. It's like,
mm,
because I won't be sub coaching that much because I'm playing the barbecue and because I'm taking 3 or 4 weeks, a couple weeks off sub coaching because everybody's on. Yeah, that's exactly right. So there's a rhythm that you have, and Jesus had rhythm. In fact, he would get away. He says he'd get away to a quiet place. He and his disciples, in fact, they loved going to the Decapolis because they could get away from the Jews who were just so intense. We're trying to figure out: Are you the Messiah? You're not the Messiah. Are you the prophet? It was a place where you could kind of relax and chill.
so good. And then one thing we'd like to think about going into our next season is how we've been doing in sub coaching. How have we been equipping and preparing, our guys? How are we pairing them up? And that's a little bit what we want to just take time out to think about this month on the Ignite Cast is what are some strategies that Jesus used in order to build this family of disciples that were traveling together on the road together 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. There must have been more personal conflict in the actual story than we read about in the Bible, right? You have people coming together with so many different backgrounds and skills and personalities and value systems. And God was just pulling this group of people together and aligning them under an overall shared mission because they were about to launch the Church of Jesus Christ on planet Earth. And so we read about a little bit of conflict here and there, but it's kind of a minor part of the story. And so so Dan, let's talk today about how do we how do we reach our key core disciple makers in our network when there's so many differences in all those different things. So lead us, brother.
A great intro. What happens is when you look at the New Testament, we miss this piece that Jesus actually put together this place where he's got two guys that want to kill each other. He invited them both strategically in. Matthew works for Rome. He's actually making lots of bank on just ripping people off his home folk, his own kinsmen, his own countrymen. And Simon, on the other hand, has been in Gamala in a terrorist training cell, figuring out how to kill Matthew and all the other Roman officials like him. And what does Jesus do? He invites them both to be disciples. Simon is a zealot. On the other hand, Matthew is a Roman leader. So that's a tension. How does that work? How do you, and I've heard guys say, well, men and women say, in my accelerate culture, they're not getting along great. And they're shocked. And I said, well, don't be shocked. Jesus dealt with that same issue. How do you deal with that? Jim, what's some thoughts that you have on that?
Well, we're going to talk here in just a second about grouping people up in different sub coaching groups. Which, Dan, I would love for you to go back over. I just think it's good to always talk about why we connect people in sub coaching groups, as opposed to, I see a lot of people just catching up with individual disciple makers. So why group them up? I think we can't talk about that enough. But when we look at that illustration of how Jesus kind of grouped up within the oikoses and the relationships and that kind of thing, you wouldn't see Simon and Matthew in that same sub-coaching group. But the thing that I think is really amazing is that when you are sub-coaching people, you are moving them all along at their pace, getting them focused on the same things, so that eventually when they're back in that large group, their values have changed, what they care about has changed, what is most important to them has changed, and so now they're really more on the same page. Whereas if you tried to put them in a room together and drag them along together, that probably actually would be more harm than good. But again, if you've got them in separate sub-coaching groups, coaching them up at their pace, getting them there, then they're going to have a much better relationship. And so, I think about our retreat that we have, our Ignite retreat, which is coming up. If you haven't registered, make sure you register. But I think about, if we go back 5 years, how many of those leaders in the room that now just gel together and talk about, doing the same things and being on the same mission and loving the same things? How many of them would kind of be 5 years ago judging each other and kind of looking, going, your way of doing church is stupid. I'm going to sit here and be nice while I talk to you. I'm going to walk away and go, well, that was dumb. But now, as Dan's worked with some people and I've worked with some people and Kevin's worked with some people, and we're coaching people along separately. Together now, there's so much more unity. And so it's a really cool picture of how sub-coaching and moving everybody along at their own pace eventually gets everybody in the same direction and on the same page.
That's so well said, Jim. Thank you for sharing that. And yeah, and and one of the things we talk about in the network, and I think the retreat's a perfect example, is we don't associate on theology or on ecclesiology, not church practice or even doctrine. We agree on mission. Jesus, that's what we talk about. Christology is the most important thing, who Jesus is, and then Jesus gave us our missiology. When you get those two, ecclesiology and theology, those are all literally second, third tier level things. Jesus and his mission, he says, look, if you're my disciples, you're going to go and make disciples of all ethnos. The Great Commission doesn't have a whole lot else in it other than that. And that's what we agree on as mission. And how we do the other things, we agree to let each other be led. And I love what Paul says, don't try to correct another person's servant. In other words, if I'm the servant of Jesus and you're the servant of Jesus, Jesus is the one who corrects us, not each other. We are all together on the same mission. So beautiful image. Thank you, Jim. So well said. And we're going to look at this piece because what happens is I created this crazy diagram. And what happens is this comes from the Gospel of Matthew. And these are the pairs that I believe are the sub-coaching pairs of Jesus. And I think they're also the pairs that Jesus used as he sent his disciples out, because he sent them out in pairs. And Kevin, you asked a great question. It's like, well, how do you know that? Well, I don't know that for sure. But when you look at the Greek, all the other ones just list the disciples in a list. In the Greek, Matthew puts them in pairs, James and John, Andrew and Simon. He clearly puts them into groups because there's a reason for it. And then he talks about sending them out in pairs. And then he talks about, that's the Matthew version of what we also talk about in Luke and in Mark about how he sends the disciples out. So going back to that, I believe those were probably sub-coaching groups too, at least early on, because he had not put Peter, James, and John into a sub-coaching group, which he does later on. I think, look at what he does in this early season. He puts them in pairs that are, because Andrew and Peter are brothers, and they're the apostolic developers. James and John are brothers, first follower movement makers. Philip and Nathaniel are in the same oikos. They're probably cousins coming from Cana. So Judas and Simon, both zealots from terror training school in Gamala. Matthew and Thomas, they're both loyal guardians connected to Rome. James and Thaddeus, they're brothers. So what has happened? We don't think brothers, think oikos. Because in that culture, if you were brothers, you did fishermen together, your kids hung out together, they played sports together, stickball in the courtyard or whatever they do. So it's not just family like we think. It actually was who you work with, who you live with, who's in your oikos. They were oikos connected. Sometimes in our families aren't oikos connected. They're just blood connected. So anyway, but going back to this idea, last time we talked about Simon Peter, and that was a whole last month. That's where we riffed on that one. But the other part of the pair was Andrew. And so that's where we're going to pick up today. So Andrew and Peter, they were both apostolic developers, going back to this. And then we're going to look at these. Who are the apostolic? Well, they were both apostolic, and they're different kinds of apostles. And there's their Zebedee, their dad. Peter, we talked about him last month. He was crucified upside down in Rome. But let's look at Andrew. We didn't talk anything about Andrew last month. So John is Andrew's disciple maker, and he says, look, there's Jesus, the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world. Andrew immediately was out following him. Andrew also was the same guy who did the loaves and the fishes. So what is Andrew? He's kind of a developer guy. He's pulling things together. He's making things happen. And Andrew, he followed the Apostle Paul, connected with him, and he actually went to Ephesus, and then he became the pastor and leader at Pergia, and he was crucified upside down, just like his brother Peter in Phrygia, which is in Galatia, which is one of the seven letters of the seven churches. That's that same area right there. So Andrew was an interesting guy, and that kind of so. Let's talk about. We're going to talk about three different pairs. So Peter and Andrew. Think about. I mean, we talked about Andrew last month at length. So these two guys, one I think is an apostolic dominant, which means he's like uh, I think kind of like you, Kevin, in some ways, where he's very well. Kevin and you, Jim, I think you are both pretty apostolic dominant. You build systems, you think through processes, but you don't love running the system for 50 years. You love to start it. Jim, you started a great system, the Northridge Network. Kevin, you started a great network. That would be the Andrew version versus maybe not as much the Apostle Peter. So, what can we learn? How do you disciple? I think in some ways, Andrew and Peter and James and John may have been of the sub coaching groups of Jesus. Those had to be tougher ones. How do you lead strong leaders, guys, in sub coaching?
I think one thing just to throw in here in this conversation that's interesting is we basically do that with the Ignite Network, but we haven't really talked about it before. So anytime you have a really good system and you want to cascade it and scale it down, you just replicate what you've already done at a smaller scale or larger scale, whichever way you're looking at. And I'll never forget, there's one particular key leader in my network, like probably the key leader, or early on at least, was that had never been to an Ignite retreat. And last November was his first time to come to an Ignite retreat. And we pull up and he's just kind of like starry-eyed. Almost reminds me of when Jesus took the disciples to, Jerusalem for the first time and they see the big buildings, right? And the only thing he knew was, and being sub-coached in a very organic network, that has no centralization, no Sunday services, et cetera. And we show up, and at the end of the thing, we're debriefing, and he says, I had no idea that Ignite was as maybe developed as it is. And so basically what I had done is I know his heart is to be organic and decentralized and life on life. And so I'm coaching him and raising him up and discipling him in that context. But I'm just as connected to people like Jim who have multiple campuses of Sunday gatherings, right? So we're building off principles, not off context or form. We're building off function as opposed to form. We have lots and lots and lots of different forms within the Ignite network, but we're all functioning as disciple-making missionaries in our context. So that's an example of like network-wide of how we kind of already do this. We subdivide into contexts, even cities and regions and cohorts. All of that is different types of people connecting in context, but we all, in an overarching way, connect in function, which is following the disciple-making patterns of Jesus, right? So we do that already. We just haven't talked about it. And so I think this month is us encouraging you to think through your local context and find differences that might actually divide groupings within your network and figure out how to subcoach them and contextualize. One way I do this very frequently is by, and I'm not saying this is the way to do it, but it's one way to do it is dividing your subcoaching groups into fivefold ministry functions. So I'll have an apostolic cohort, a more shepherding cohort. That way the differences are not distracting them from the overarching principle of Jesus pattern disciple making.
So, Kevin, what you're actually saying is you're doing the very same things that Jesus did, because Jesus actually used what we would call APES cultures, and even though these are all 12 of these guys are called apostles, they all had different combinations with their apostolic gift. They all had a scent level, but they were all developing, and they were all very different. And so we looked at those two, Andrew and Simon, and we spent so much time on them last time. Let's move on to James and John. Now, James and John, those would be what we would call those are first follower movement makers. Think about it, they're both highly apostolic, and this is a challenging pair to lead. Think about even some of the language and the nicknames that come out from these guys. So what happens is James and John, first follower movement makers, they Boanerges was their dad, and remember what was the nickname that Jesus gave these two guys? Remember what he called them?
Sons of Thunder.
Thunder Boys. That's right. And so when Jesus called them, they got out of the boat and they literally left their source of income and they left Thunder Dad and they went, they were the first Thundermans. If you have teenage kids, you know, preteens, you understand that one. And so anyway, so what happens is he leads them in this process and the reason why they live up to their nickname. They're called Sons of Thunder because think about it. Remember when they go to the Samaritan village, they want to call down fire from heaven and they want to actually do an intifada. They want to do they want to have a holy war. They want to kill the Samaritans. And Jesus said, okay, let's not really roast those people we want to reach. And he talks to them, disciples them through that process. And then what do? Just as he thinks maybe they're getting it and they're catching it, they come, they want the chief seats. They say, hey, we want to be on your right and on your left when you come into your glory. In fact, their mom in another version comes and even asks for them. Jesus sits down and says, okay, thank you, but that's not how this thing rolls. You're to be a servant, and that's not how this thing goes. So what is he doing? He's training them, he's teaching them. But then that creates another problem because now the disciples are now kind of opposed to James and John, and so they have a kind of a meeting like, "Hey, what are you doing, jumping the shark here, trying to get in the head of the lion? What are you up to?" So Jesus does something. A couple things we can look at. One is Jesus gives nicknames, calls them Thunder Boys, right? When you give a nickname, what is it? Don't you? Isn't there a bonding,
Oh
especially
yeah.
guys, when you
Yeah.
give it?
Yeah. My primary APES team meets, I say this frequently every Wednesday morning at the Grecian restaurant at 7 o'clock. And that's where you'll find my five. Four of us now, one's moved away, but yeah, we just call each other the boys, and there is some kind of a bonding and cultural thing that happens when you have a nickname like the boys, it's time for the boys to get together. So
And I've been in both of your cultures, and it's rowdy. But Jim's culture is the rowdiest I've ever been in, and they're giving each other nicknames. They're messing with each other. There's inside jokes. It's hard for anybody else to come into your cohort, Jim, because it's so inside joke. But people want to actually be in that, Jim,
mhm.
and so you've created that kind of playful camaraderie spirit. And so there's something really powerful about that, even in sub coaching and so how does that work, guys? How did you guys get to that place, Jim?
That's a great question. I don't know. By not being stodgy, I guess. I don't know. We like each other. We like what we're doing together. We like each other. We enjoy doing it together. And so,
Mhm.
yeah, I don't know, it just kind of flows. It might be one of those kind of things, Craig Rochelle talks about in his book, that if you have it and you don't know why you have it, you will not continue to have it. So I guess I need to figure out how we got there. I didn't know that was such a Jesus thing. It almost kind of feels like Jesus gave them the name Sons of Thunder, almost like, hey there, calm down there, boys, Sons of
Mhm.
Thunder. So maybe that was to kind of remind them of, you guys can be a little extreme sometimes, so rein it in. I don't know.
So instead of being critical or harsh on them, he gives them a nickname and uses kind of a sidebar way of saying, "Hey, Thunder Boys, hey, Thunderman, I know you guys." And then what about Peter? He goes, "Okay, Rocky, dun 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 dun. Okay, yeah, you can run up the steps and drink the eggs, but dude, you're an ear cutter, dude, ear slicer. Just and he lets them be who they are. He coaches them. He lets them be playful. He doesn't, I mean, think about it. In our churches, if we give each other nicknames, it's because we spent so much time with them. We did it on a camping trip, on a sidebar thing. Our churches are so formal historically that we don't let that playful side of Jesus because we don't really know how to do in many American churches how to even do disciple making. I think part of this culture of playfulness, nicknames, connecting with each other, keeping the vision out front is a serious part of the Jesus culture that I think we've missed.
I think you just hit on it right there. Well, I said, well, we just don't want to be stodgy, but truly making disciples in the way that Jesus did is a very relational thing. It's not a program. It's not a person that knows more than you stands up front and you would never joke with them about, whatever about themselves. And so, yeah, I think because it's so relational, that's why that environment is created.
Mm. I think as
So
with group in a group setting and giving groups nicknames and things like that, it's every major I don't know if I'd say institution, but every major way that people relate to one another is done like this. Like in the military, it's not just I was in the army. We talked about Band of Brothers earlier, right, Dan? It's that I was in company X, whatever that company was. There's these
easy.
groupings of people, right, that it's an identity thing. Now, the place where we see that most in our culture in America probably is in sporting teams, right? I'm an Auburn fan, and I have all this insider language. War Eagle is our war cry, but yet we're Tigers for mascots, and orange and blue is my colors. It's like there's all these identity pieces that make me in partnership with. I'm not a huge sports fan. Let me be clear about that, but it puts me in community and partnership with another group of people, right? And makes it, we talk a lot about belong before you believe. So there's just identity pieces to that. Sports, military. I mean, we could go on how we kind of subdivide ourselves. And those subdivisions are based on some shared mission, right? So if you're in the 82nd Airborne, it's about, there's a specialty that ties you together, a common mission, a shared mission. If it's in, if you're an Auburn fan, your one goal every year is to beat Alabama. Be the only game you win, but you're going to you try to beat Alabama. So there's these overarching shared missions that tie us together in community. So we've talked about that before, Dan, and we won't rehash it, but liminality. Liminality is just simply a word that means what happens in between two realities. So, we go into this mission field as disconnected followers of Jesus, and then we bind together our hearts to the common mission to break ground in a particular mission field, where we share something in common. Either we live in the same neighborhood or we work at the same workplace. And so our identity is to be a grouping, a team of people under the authority of Jesus to tackle some particular overarching mission together, to be on co-mission together.
Yes.
So shared co-mission creates relationship that goes beyond our differences and ties us together. So in the Ignite network, our shared mission is disciple making from the Jesus pattern. And it doesn't matter whether Jim does a multi-campus Sunday institution or I'm out launching simple churches, in mission fields. That's not what we can either choose to focus on what divides us or what brings us together. What brings us together is a common mission to make disciples in the Jesus pattern of disciple making. So that was a lot of words, and I apologize, but it's an identity piece. And so when we give each other nicknames or we call groupings things, my very first, I hated this name, but my very first simple church was called Sacred Vibes, spelled Vibez. Would I have named it that? Absolutely not. But this group of people on a common mission together picked a name to identify who they were. So there's a lot of power in that. But you do that as well with your sub-coaching groups, which get back on topic. Sorry about that. But these pairings, you're pairing them intentionally for a reason. It could be any number of reasons, but there's something that ties them together as a sub-coaching group. And so how do you leverage that? How do you identify that? How do you equip that? How do you coach that? Because it's this particular small sub-coaching group that shares some things in common that group B is not going to have, right? And so you have to adjust your coaching style based on the context of each of those pairings.
Mm.
And it's okay if they have conflict early on, because you mentioned Band of Brothers. Well, in Band of Brothers, the New Jersey guy is duking it out, and they start fighting, and they're brawling, and all they know is if you don't like a guy, you go after him, you beat him. At the end, they're dying for each other, shedding blood. They will be. They said that they're closer than any other relationship they had in their entire life. Named Band of Brothers. The disciples at first, Matthew and Simon the Zealot want to kill each other. Their mission is to destroy each other. At the end, they die for each other. And the martyrdom is a huge piece. And That is a major deal. So Jesus had to reshape their ambition, had to let the Holy Spirit really change their perspective. They had to change and if you miss the change what you care about piece in the multiplication cycle, if you miss that, you'll never get anywhere beyond that. Because the change what you care about, it gives you the ability, because any green shoot you get, if you don't change what you care about, you're going to disciple what you are. And when you build X group and developing communities and churches, if they're not changed, they're just going to suck right back down onto the into the attractional church model. So Jesus, how do you create a culture where people are willing to die for the mission?
Man, that's a good question.
Hey, Dan, Kevin talked about just now that there could be several different factors that you use to kind of group up sub-coaching groups. And so I think sometimes when people come to this Ignite thing, they look at it and they go, okay, so now how am I supposed to do this? How am I supposed to do that? And so they always think, okay, so you tell me how to do it, and I'll do it. But really, it's so many different factors. You look, some of these people are grouped up because of long-term relationships. Some of them are grouped up because of interest. So there's not one particular rule. It seems like that would be something that really should just be prayed through, and maybe you're just in your time of prayer just sketching out the different relationships and things like that till you kind of really come to a conclusion. How do you see that, Dan, with all the different factors, whether it's where they are in their disciple making journey or relationships or whatever? How do you see that, as far as how do you go about narrowing that down and figuring out who to put with who?
A great question. And I think the first thing we have to do is, if we don't change what we care about and make it non-institutional, it's doomed to fail. And so, here's the thing is, I historically write a lot of things on dry erase boards and draw perfect designs and graphics. And I say, and it won't work like that. It just won't. Now, what I'm saying is there's a pattern that Jesus used, and there's some things to think about. You'll probably need to violate those. But if you know why you violate them, you're fine.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't know why you violate them, you're a fool, because you're just in the blind, flying dark, and you're going to crash and it won't work. So why do we teach the Jesus pattern? Not that you'll do it step by step, but that the Holy Spirit will give you the basis information so that you can make decisions that are going to be spirit-led decisions. So when we subcoach, we say, first step is, there's actually kind of three categories. Try to put them in same-sex groups. Sometimes you have to violate that. Sometimes you got a couple that's really working with two other couples, violate it, but try to go same-sex group. Try to use invisible time if you can. Why? Because people don't have time at 7:30 at night. They need to be with their family. They've got other things they need to be on mission. They need to be on their street. Try to make it in the morning before work, at lunch, or immediately after work. But does that work? Sometimes they do it after church. Sometimes I don't care. Just a theory. And then also, you need to always have a green shoot. Well, you will always have a green shoot. Maybe you have two green shoots, but there's some core basics that we want you to do. But then you're not going to get to nicknaming, having the kind of fun that you guys have in both of your networks with a rigid institutional approach. Neither of you are institutional. You did not get where you are with institutionalism. So if you followed some criteria step by step, we do it this way. Your guys go, oh yes, yes, yes. Well, you're not going to nickname them Rocky,
Well, we talked earlier about how do you lead strong leaders, and Kevin alluded to the concept of just, principle. Strong leaders care, they get very opinionated about form and how they go about doing things and things like that. So if it just comes down to here's the principle and we're all hanging together on that, then you have a lot of freedom. And that, I think, that appeals to strong leaders.
You do.
That's why our November retreat works so well, right? We have a huge variety of different forms in the room, but the principles is what drives, or what we at least try to drive, that culture of that annual retreat.
So good. So, we asked the question a moment ago, how do you develop disciples that are willing to die for the mission? Every one of his disciples died for the mission, except for really Judas, who didn't, who died for the wrong mission. And John. So in this process, let's look at these last two real quick. James, he dies by the sword. He was the very first martyr we had, and he was the first leader there in the Jerusalem church. And so that's a huge sacrifice that he had. And then John, his brother, he's the only disciple that did not die a martyr's death. He was boiled in oil and wishes he had died. He would prefer to have died, but he's called the disciple of love. Now, hold it. What's going on? Because Jesus called them Thunder Boys, and John's nickname is the disciple of love, and James is the first one who sacrificed. The two most self-centered guys in the group, Peter would be right there with them, died and gave their life. And so that's the kingdom movement.
Yeah,
It comes from coaching the Holy Spirit.
I would definitely say, Dan, is you've got to just get in the trenches. I think the best disciples come from disciple makers who have gone before them. That's I hate to keep using this term, but it gets back to my disciple maker or disciple teacher. Disciple teachers are going to reproduce disciple teachers. But if you're in the trenches and they see you making disciples in your oikos, then they're just going to follow your lead. That's why the Church of Jesus Christ, there's been people throughout the centuries that are willing to die for it, is because those who founded it were willing to hang on crosses and get burned at the stake and get their heads chopped off. I mean, I wish there was another way. It would be more comfortable, but there's just not. If we're going to follow Jesus, the leader of the entire transformational, history-changing movement, died on a cross. Yeah. That's my answer. Is that's how we raise up people willing to die for the mission, is that we show them who's willing to sacrifice for the mission.
Think about this. In the Greek language, every time the disciples would talk about Jesus or share a story about Jesus, the word for when they do that is the word martyreia. So the bottom line is Jesus said, they're going to hate you, they're going to crucify you, they're going to kill you, they're going to persecute you. He said in the Sermon on the Mount, blessed are you when people revile you and hate you and call you evil things. Great is your reward in heaven. Yours is the kingdom of God. This is what you're doing. Don't think you're doing something wrong. You're doing something right. That's the goal. Not that we try to make people hate us. He said they're going to resist you. And so in this process, you get some really significant things. And let's go to the last couple and last pair of leaders. You have Philip and Nathaniel, and I call them connector skeptics. And so what happens is they're really connector evangelists. Nathaniel began as a skeptic. Can any good thing come from Nazareth? So he asked that question, and so what does Philip do? He introduces him to Jesus. So Nathaniel and Philip become the evangelist connectors. They're the ones that connect other people, and so Philip, he was very much of a pragmatist. He's logical kind of guy, struggled with faith at first, and so when there's the feeding of the 5,000. And there's all this need for food, and it's getting late, and people are getting weak, and Philip says, "We need to feed them." And Jesus says, "You feed them." And he goes, he does the math and said, "That would take how much wages? What?" So Philip immediately goes to the challenge, and every one of our networks have quite people who do the math, and they say that's not possible. And how many of apostolic leaders go, "Philip, take a deep breath. Let's trust Jesus." Yes, but we're going to go broke with that. And then Philip comes to Jesus and says, "Jesus, would you show us the Father?" And he goes, "Philip, I've been with you all this time, and you're asking me this thing about the Father? I and the Father are one." And so this process of Philip and Nathaniel is an interesting. Now, one of the things that the problem with Philip is you've got a name problem because he's listed as two different names. Sometimes he gets listed as Bartholomew, sometimes it's Nathaniel, same guy. Don't let that confuse you. And the synoptics call him Bartholomew. John's gospel calls him Nathaniel. And so what Jesus says to him, when they open up this conversation, Jesus says, And he goes, can any good thing come from Nazareth? And he goes, who are you, Jesus? What's your deal? And Jesus says, Philip, when you were under that fig tree praying, man, that's the kind of prayer I love to have. He said, you are a Nazarite in whom there's no guile. He said, you keep praying that prayer, bro. You're going to see the kingdom of God. Well, if someone tells you, hey, that prayer was an awesome prayer that you prayed this morning, you keep praying that the Holy Spirit's going to work in your life. Philip was in. And he died a martyr's death in India. And so you see, we've been looking at these pairs. So what do we get from Philip and Nathaniel? You have the evangelist connectors. When you have evangelist connectors, when you lead your accelerate gathering, have you ever noticed this? Sometimes your evangelist connectors intimidate everybody else because they have spiritual conversation. Everybody goes, I suck. Those guys, I'm just going to quit. Leave it to them. No, Philip and Nathaniel, you've already got all you need. You got Peter and Simon. Oh boy, Rocky. You got Thunder Boys, and you got the evangelist superstars. I suck. I'm a shepherd. I'm a teacher. You just do that with those guys. I'm out of here. Peace out. You've had people do that. And the problem is your best leaders are ready to walk out. They're the best leaders that are going to lead the movement. The shepherd teachers lead the movement, not your evangelist apes. That's it. This is not easy. This sub-coaching thing is how you keep them from walking out on you. What do you guys do in those situations? We need to wrap up, but as we kind of wrap up this time, how do you do that? What's miracle? What's your secret sauce for keeping guys in the process when they want to walk?
I think that's part of the huge value of sub coaching is you're dealing with them and where they are and what's going on with them. And if you have them maybe grouped with somebody that doesn't intimidate them, then they get to see those conversations at a deeper level as well and realize I'm not the only person who is struggling through this or that. This doesn't come easy or that doesn't come easy for everybody. And you're able to individually look at them and say, have you really taken account of the progress and the success that you have had?
That's good. I also would say, like, this is a little bit of a journey away from what we just talked about, but on the flip side, it's also super important to get people from different giftings together. So I'm thinking of one guy in particular that there's no reason he should still be with us from early on. He's a high shepherd. I don't understand him. He don't understand me. We kind of not butted heads, but we've had to try to understand each other over the last 6 years he's been with me in our network. And I'm like, why is he still here? And he never got engaged until recently, when the other functions of our APES team began to encourage him that we need you. We have to have a place. We have to have you in this mix, or we're going to miss out on this whole shepherding piece because we're all different. So letting them understand, helping them, I think getting them in all gathering type scenarios, whether those are large or small, all gathering, encourage one another. The reason he's with us is because he wants to see the gospel advance till there's no place left on the planet, but he don't know how to do that. He don't understand that, but we've been able to convince him that we can't advance the kingdom without his giftings. So affirmation, as you're dividing them out into subgrouping coaches, getting them back in the same room together so they can feed off of each other, I think is this rhythm of sub-coach all gather is really important to keep everybody motivated and looking forward.
Yeah. So going back to what I said earlier, that's so good, Kevin. You want to put them into groups. So Jesus's priority was he put males with males, females with females, because he sub-coached both. And then he tried to put them into oikos-based groups because they could multiply. Because what's their next going to do? They're going to go out and find a green shoot, find a person of peace. That's the first thing they're going to do. He didn't necessarily get them in their exact kind of APES connection, but he put them in pairs that were going to complement each other and work together with each other with a strong dominant and with a supporter. And that's a powerful combination. If you're forming X groups, look for a person who can lead and a person who can support. And you have a person who can keep the schedule, make things happen, and have the power and passion to get it going. And when you put your accelerate gatherings together this fall, be looking at what's the Father giving you? What cards has he dealt with you? Because you got to be thinking X groups and multiplication from the day you start your Accelerate gathering this fall
It's
for
good.
the future.
Yeah, so good. Well, guys, we're out of time, and thank everybody for joining. When you get together with your cohort groups this month, just continue to wrestle through this. You might even want to ask each other hard questions about how you're sub-coaching, and maybe even, sometimes it's great just to pick one person for that cohort and say, let's mastermind this together. Let's work it out. Tell us about your disciples, and tell us about where they're engaged, disengaged, and maybe even help each other pair up. Sub-coaching groups might be something fun to do. So you guys know how to do that. You walk so well in community together and cohort together. So those are some things to be thinking about. And then the link is live on the website, ignite disciplemaking.com. The link is live for the November retreat, as Jim mentioned earlier. So it's the earlier you get signed up, the better, because when we run out of hotel rooms on site, then we're stuck to figuring out hotel rooms off site. So if you want the most convenient experience, jump on now, today, tomorrow, immediately, and get signed up. Just one thing that's a little different this year, there's an extra option to sign up to stay for the Southeast region of the Missionary Church Annual Conference. Never done those side by side before, so we're excited about that. But just so it's not confusing when you go to the Eventbrite to sign up, that's what that extra option is for. We would love for whoever wants to hang out with a broader group of people, a broader family of churches, to hang out 2 days. We're going to be sticking around a day after the Ignite retreat to gather with that group. So I just wanted you to know that, because it might be confusing when you look at it. And everything else is self-explanatory as usual. Easy to thank you, Gabby and Amy, for working on that for us. And but get signed up quick, because we need to get numbers and get you guys in a room.
And remember, discount code is coming in an email this week. So if you're in the Ignite network, don't overlook that discount code. You'll need to use that. And we're only sending out this time. So make sure you pay attention to the email coming right now. So
Awesome. Well, happy August, moving into September, into the fall. And take your half day of prayer. That's the most important thing I think that we would all tell you to do, is try to take a half day of prayer a month, to have what we call a staff meeting with the Father, and to seek guidance on how to launch into the fall. Don't feel bad about what you haven't done this summer. Feel really good about what's coming in this new season in the fall. So blessings, guys. Thanks for joining us on the IgniteCast. And until we meet again, blessings, and let's stay on the mission field.